In July 1974, a newly appointed United States Treasury Secretary boarded a plane for a secret mission to Saudi Arabia that would alter global monetary history forever. The world economy was reeling from soaring energy prices, double-digit inflation, and the total collapse of the gold-backed financial order. Without gold backing the U.S. dollar, central banks around the globe were rapidly losing faith in paper greenbacks. To save the American economy from financial catastrophe, Washington needed an anchor even more critical to human survival than gold. They found that anchor in crude oil. The unwritten accord struck in Riyadh created the Petrodollar system, an economic engine that guaranteed global demand for the dollar for over half a century. This is the extraordinary story of how oil replaced gold, how military might backed monetary power, and how a secret deal preserved American financial supremacy. To understand the desperation of 1974, we must first travel back to the historic Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944. Delegates from 44 allied nations gathered in New Hampshire to construct a stable international monetary architecture for the post-war era. Under the Bretton Woods system, the United States dollar was tied directly to physical gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. All other world currencies were then pegged to the U.S. dollar, making the greenback the undisputed global reserve currency. Foreign central banks held massive dollar reserves, confident that they could convert those paper notes into physical gold bullion whenever they pleased. However, economic principles such as the Triffin dilemma warned that a nation issuing the global reserve currency must run persistent trade deficits to supply world liquidity. As the 1960s progressed, Washington engaged in massive government spending to fund both the Vietnam War and expansive domestic social programs. To finance these mounting expenditures, the Federal Reserve printed far more dollars than could ever be backed by the physical gold sitting in Fort Knox vaults. Astute international leaders began noticing the growing disparity between circulated paper dollars and physical gold reserves held by the United States Treasury. French President Charles de Gaulle became particularly vocal, openly criticizing Washington for enjoying what French officials termed an exorbitant privilege. De Gaulle famously argued that the United States was effectively using unbacked paper notes to buy up foreign companies and industrial assets around the world. France began sending Navy ships loaded with paper dollars directly to New York harbors, demanding physical gold bullion in return from the Federal Reserve Bank. European central banks followed suit, rapidly redeeming paper dollars for physical gold bars, threatening to completely drain America's sovereign gold stock. By mid-1971, official gold reserves held by the United States had fallen to their lowest levels in over 30 years, triggering an existential crisis in Washington. As American gold reserves dropped to historic lows, a severe panic swept through the halls of the White House, the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve. On Sunday evening, August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon delivered a televised national address that shocked global financial markets. Nixon unilaterally suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold, closing the gold window and dismantling the core pillar of the Bretton Woods monetary arrangement. Overnight, the world was plunged into a brand new era of unbacked fiat currency, leaving central banks holding paper notes with no intrinsic backing or redemption guarantee. Fears of hyperinflation and competitive currency devaluations spread through international bond markets as the global financial system lost its institutional anchor. Central bankers across Europe and Asia expressed deep anger as the dollar's value plummeted on international foreign exchange desks. The immediate aftermath of the Nixon shock triggered severe economic instability and currency volatility across Western industrial economies. Without a physical gold anchor, the American dollar devalued rapidly against foreign currencies, causing global commodity prices to skyrocket. Then, in October 1973, geopolitical tensions in the Middle East erupted into the Yom Kippur War. In response to Western military aid to Israel, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, known as OPEC, announced a targeted oil embargo. Arab oil-producing nations drastically reduced crude oil production and cut off exports entirely to the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, and the Netherlands. The price of crude oil skyrocketed virtually overnight from roughly $3 per barrel to nearly $12 per barrel. Motorists in Western cities faced grueling hours-long lines at gasoline stations, while gas stations displayed signs declaring they were completely out of fuel. The dramatic fourfold spike in energy costs rippled through every single sector of the global industrial economy. Manufacturing plants faced staggering electricity bills, transportation costs soared, and consumer prices escalated at terrifying rates. The Western world entered a painful period of stagflation, characterized by stagnating economic growth combined with runaway inflation. Central bankers were trapped in a nightmare scenario as traditional monetary tools failed to control rising prices while unemployment surged. Worse still, without the gold standard, foreign nations began questioning why they should continue holding devaluing American dollars at all. European and Asian trade partners discussed creating regional currency blocks or demanding physical commodities in exchange for their industrial exports. If global demand for the U.S. dollar continued to plunge, hyperinflation threatened to destroy the domestic purchasing power of the American public. Washington realized it urgently needed a compelling mechanism to force foreign countries to hoard dollars once again. Without an international agreement forcing world trade into dollars, the United States risked losing its financial empire. Enter William Simon, a former successful Wall Street bond trader who had been appointed Treasury Secretary by President Nixon. In July 1974, Simon embarked on what official diplomatic schedules described as a routine economic tour of Europe and the Middle East. In reality, Simon had received explicit, highly confidential instructions from the White House to execute a high-stakes negotiation in Saudi Arabia. Accompanying Simon was a tiny team of top economic aides, traveling under strict secrecy to avoid alerting international media or foreign diplomats. Saudi Arabia was the largest crude oil exporter in OPEC, holding vast, undisputed petroleum reserves beneath its desert sands. King Faisal bin Abdulaziz Al Saud and his influential oil minister, Ahmed Zaki Yamani, were deeply concerned about regional security and political stability. The Saudi royal family faced dangerous regional threats, including hostile neighboring regimes armed with Soviet weaponry. Simon understood that despite their immense oil wealth, the Saudi royal family was militarily vulnerable in a volatile region. The negotiations took place in total secrecy, far away from public scrutiny or international press coverage. The American delegation brought a proposal that addressed Saudi Arabia's existential security concerns while solving America's monetary crisis. The terms of the proposed deal were straightforward, highly pragmatic, and immensely powerful for both sovereign nations. It was a masterclass in transactional diplomacy where economic power met military necessity. First, the United States offered an ironclad military guarantee to defend the Saudi kingdom against external aggression and regional rivals. Washington promised to supply Saudi Arabia with state-of-the-art military hardware, advanced fighter jets, radar systems, and comprehensive military training. American defense contractors were dispatched to build modern air bases, naval facilities, and communication networks throughout the Saudi peninsula. In return for this total security umbrella, Saudi Arabia agreed to two historic, non-negotiable conditions that would redefine international finance. Condition number one, Saudi Arabia agreed that all future crude oil sales will be priced exclusively in United States dollars. No matter which country wanted to purchase Saudi crude, be it Germany, Japan, France, or Great Britain, they had to pay in U.S. dollars. If a European or Asian nation lacked sufficient dollar reserves, it had to sell its own domestic goods to America to earn greenbacks. Condition number two, Saudi Arabia agreed to reinvest hundreds of billions of petrodollar profits back into American financial markets. Specifically, the Saudi government agreed to purchase vast quantities of United States Treasury bonds and sovereign debt instruments. To facilitate this massive financial inflow without disrupting public bond markets, Washington agreed to bypass normal competitive auction procedures. The Treasury created a specialized add-on bidding mechanism that allowed Saudi Arabia to buy U.S. debt secretly without alerting public traders. This secretive arrangement concealed the true size of Saudi holdings from Congress, foreign governments, and financial competitors for decades. By late 1974, Saudi Arabia successfully persuaded the rest of the OPEC cartel to adopt the exact same pricing model. From that point forward, virtually all crude oil traded anywhere on planet Earth was priced and settled exclusively in American dollars. This unified OPEC decision locked global energy markets into an inescapable reliance on the American currency. The creation of the petrodollar system was a masterstroke of geopolitical and financial engineering that preserved American hegemony. Crude oil is the blood of modern industrial civilization, powering factories, cargo ships, commercial aviation, automobiles, and electrical grids. Because every country required oil to sustain its industrial society, every nation suddenly required vast stockpiles of physical U.S. dollars. If a nation like Japan or Germany wanted to fuel its factories, it first had to export real manufactured goods to America to earn greenbacks. Central banks worldwide were forced to accumulate massive U.S. dollar reserves simply to guarantee their ongoing national energy security. This artificial, mandatory global demand created an endless bid for paper dollars, effectively absorbing American inflation and exporting it overseas. Furthermore, as OPEC nations accumulated trillions in petrodollars, commercial banks recycled those funds back into Western financial markets. Wall Street banks lent these recycled petrodollars to developing nations in Latin America and Africa, sparking a global lending boom throughout the 1970s and 1980s. This petrodollar recycling loop provided Washington with an endless stream of cheap credit to finance massive national debt and budget deficits. American consumers enjoyed cheaper import goods and lower interest rates, while the U.S. military expanded its global operational reach. The dollar was no longer backed by physical gold locked in Fort Knox vaults. It was backed by the black gold flowing from Middle Eastern oil fields. This symbiotic relationship allowed the United States to maintain unprecedented geopolitical dominance without maintaining a physical gold reserve. Global trade effectively ran on a hidden dual standard: American military dominance providing security and Saudi oil enforcing currency demand. For decades, this financial architecture kept borrowing costs low for the U.S. government while locking world trade to Wall Street. For over 5 decades, the petrodollar architecture served as the undisputed bedrock of global trade and financial stability. However, maintaining this system required constant geopolitical vigilance, strategic alliances, and formidable military enforcement. Whenever oil-producing leaders threatened to price crude oil in alternative currencies like euros or gold, geopolitical tensions escalated rapidly. International trade institutions and clearing networks like SWIFT became deeply integrated with U.S. dollar settlement mechanisms. Financial sanctions, asset freezes, and banking restrictions further cemented the dollar's role as the central gateway for international commerce. In recent years, structural shifts in global energy production and international diplomacy have begun straining the traditional petrodollar framework. The United States underwent an unprecedented shale revolution, transforming from a major oil importer into one of the largest oil exporters in the world. This energy independence altered America's strategic relationship with Middle Eastern oil producers and shifted global trade flows. Concurrently, major emerging market economies have increasingly sought to diversify away from exclusive reliance on Western financial infrastructure. Saudi Arabia has recently expanded bilateral trade agreements, accepting Chinese yuan and other national currencies for select energy contracts. Multilateral organizations like BRICS are actively exploring local currency settlement mechanisms and digital payment channels for cross-border commodity trading. Central banks around the world have dramatically increased their purchases of physical gold reserves as a hedge against currency fragmentation and geopolitical risks. While the dollar remains the dominant global reserve asset today, the exclusive monopoly of the petrodollar system is gradually evolving into a multi-currency energy landscape. As trade relationships reorganize, the global monetary order is transitioning toward a more fragmented, multipolar financial architecture. The 1974 Saudi-American Accord remains one of the most consequential economic maneuvers of the 20th century. By linking paper dollars directly to essential global energy resources, Washington engineered an era of unprecedented monetary dominance that lasted for generations. Understanding the origins of the petrodollar is essential for anyone analyzing modern inflation, sovereign debt, foreign exchange markets, and global geopolitical shifts. Please remember that this video is intended strictly for historical and educational analysis and does not constitute financial or investment advice. Be sure to consult a qualified financial professional before making any investment decisions. If you found this deep dive insightful, please subscribe to